Happy Saturday. It's April 19th, 2025, and you are listening to Morning Meeting. I'm Ashley Baker in Southern California.
And I'm Michael Haney in New York City.
And Michael, I have now been in the United States for a couple of weeks. We are on Easter holiday with our kids, school break in the UK, and I am still shocked by the price of everything in this country. Like, what is going on? I can't imagine how tariffs are going to make this stuff even more expensive.
Yeah, buckle up. More expensive, and if you go to restaurants, smaller portions.
Well, this is the crazy thing. Like, when I start to think that life in London is really reasonable and the cost of living is relatively low, that's when you know we have a real problem. I mean, my breakfast burrito this morning from a drive-through restaurant was $13, and I don't really understand how that's even possible. Like, that alone sort of explains why people voted for Trump. But now the idea that all this stuff is going to be getting so much more expensive, it's just totally stupefying. Anyway, we can't make sense of it, but this issue of airmail might. And first, the news. In good news for those of us who would consider moving to a new planet, a team of scientists and astronomers at Cambridge have revealed strong evidence of extraterrestrial life on a massive planet. It's known as K2-18b, and yes, it's a little far away, just 120 light years from Earth, but the group has observed that it might just be covered with a warm ocean that's teeming with life. Sounds nice, right? As always, airmail is the journalistic equivalent of another planet, and we welcome you to our universe today.
It sure is. And it's another week in Trump's America, and another week when people are wondering what's next. And our writer, Jennifer Gould, has her report on how the city of Toronto is becoming a sanctuary city, not for migrants, but for Trump's United States critics. Then, it was a crime that shocked Los Angeles, the senseless murder of Brianna Kupfer, a UCLA student in 2022. Barbara Schroeder, a screenwriter and director, has written a heartbreaking story about her, and she joins us to discuss it. And finally, if you need any more evidence of Taylor Swift's influence in the world, consider this. She is now the subject of a new book by a senior editor at the Harvard Business Review. Kevin Evers, the author of the book, will join us to explain what he calls, quote, the strategic genius of Taylor Swift, in particular, the business and creative decisions that transformed her into an unprecedented modern cultural phenomenon, and what we can all learn from her. So, Ashley, where would you like to begin today?
Well, let's start with the social scene in Toronto, Michael. It's where everyone wants to be. Jennifer Gould is here to tell us all about it. She's a columnist at the New York Post. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Jennifer, as you report in your View from Here this week, it's actually happening. High-profile Americans are relocating to Canada, of all places, but they tend to come from a specific demographic, right?
They do. They tend to be Ivy League academics who study the history of totalitarianism, fascism, all the terrible things that we've witnessed in the 20th century and what we're witnessing in this century as well.
This is a specific response to the Trump administration and its policies?
Well, yes and no. These recruits started before Trump was elected. But when I spoke to Marcy Shore, who is coming with her husband, Timothy Snyder, the election was definitely the deciding factor for her. And she brought along her reluctant husband, who probably would have preferred to stay in the U.S., but understood her concerns as someone who writes and studies the history of, World War II, fascism, post-Cold War, totalitarianism, and on a lighter note, Eastern European intellectual history.
Let's talk about Marcy and Timothy and their story. Where are they coming from and where are they going?
So 3 of the top Yale academics who study fascism, totalitarianism, Eastern European history are coming from Yale. And another one is actually coming from Stanford as well. So these are really elite Ivy League universities that are being actively recruited by the University of Toronto, which has the Munk School, which is very focused on international affairs and people who study totalitarianism in all its forms, especially the forms that are coming out of our own century, which are actually quite different, but build upon what happened last century.
I mean, it would seem to me that the University of Toronto is really coming out ahead here. I mean, it's so interesting to consider this idea of the center of academic gravity shifting to the north.
It really is. I mean, U of T, people don't really realize it, but it is one of the top 20 research universities in the world. Last year, one of the professors co-shared a Nobel Prize. He's known as a godfather, artificial intelligence. So it's really a very strong school, but people don't really think of it, perhaps, unless they're really in the know, as they do about the top American universities. And that is definitely starting to change. And there is an idea that what is happening in the US, while it may be detrimental to academics in the US, it could be a boom for the University of Toronto.
Do we get the sense of how pronounced this trend is? We're talking about a fairly rarefied bunch here, but do you think that this conversation is going on in other corners of academia?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's two things that are happening. One is that academics in Canada heading these schools and these departments are saying they're getting calls all the time. And these professors, Marcy Shore, who I spoke to, said that people are definitely calling her and asking how they can come to. People are trying to get second passports. But the other thing is that when scientists are coming, it takes a lot more time because they're not just individuals coming, they're coming with their labs and they need a lot of money. And those types of negotiations can take 18 months to 2 years, as far as I've been told.
It's so interesting that your story comes this week as we've seen the Trump administration declare some sort of a war on Harvard. Exactly how that will unfold remains to be seen. Among the academics that you've spoken to, are they feeling ready for battle in this way? Are they looking strictly to abdicate? I mean, it's hard to make sense of the world in any way, shape, or form at this particular moment. But how do you see it?
These academics are people who are really passionate about their subjects. And, in some sense, it doesn't really matter where they are. U of T and the Munk School is doing a really good job of bringing people together in an interdisciplinary way to study this growing worldwide fight against democracy. And it happens to be a good place to go. But of course, there are people who are staying in the US who want to speak out in the US as well. What's interesting here is this interdisciplinary approach and this idea that there is the freedom to study and there is the money and there are no threats to silence people. And that, as we've seen, is happening. Timothy Snyder in particular has said that this fight against academics, even though it's supposed to be in the name of fighting anti-Semitism, is really a way to create and further make people want to become more anti-Semitic. Universities are known to have strong Jewish leadership, and limiting freedom of speech in any way is a really dangerous way to go, no matter how horrible and hateful the speech.
What's the impression of Toronto as a place to live? Because as you note in your piece, it does have its own history of anti-Semitism.
Well, Toronto, full disclosure, I am from Toronto. I love this city. It started off very, very Anglo. There were quotas on Jews to get into some programs at the University of Toronto. They were unofficial. This was many years ago. So there is that history, but it is now an international city, the fourth largest in North America, the third largest tech hub after, San Francisco, the Bay Area, and New York. So, it's extremely cosmopolitan, and it's a great place for people to be, especially in universities. There's a very international element, and unlike what's happening in the US, that diverse range of people and viewpoints is actually something that's celebrated. There was this idea that Canada had something called a mosaic instead of a melting pot, and that these differences are celebrated. And that, of course, is something to be cherished, especially in the academic world.
Jennifer, you're a New Yorker now.
Yes.
A Canadian by birth. Any designs to move back there yourself?
No, definitely not. I love New York. I feel so fortunate to be here. I have my family's whole history in Toronto, but I feel like I'm starting a new one here and very grateful for that opportunity.
I mean, Jennifer, perhaps it's an obvious comparison, but the Margaret Atwood of it all.
Absolutely. Margaret Atwood is an absolutely treasured literary icon in Canada and in Toronto in particular, where she's written a lot. There's even a great place named after her at the Park Hyatt, the Writers' Room. But her books, because what Janice Stein from the Munk School says is that when you live in Canada, you're close enough to the US, but you have that little bit of distance. And it takes someone like Margaret Atwood, who has this incredible eye, but a powerful way to tell stories that, in a way she she can make people understand the dangers of totalitarianism and what is happening at universities and elsewhere better than any academic.
Well, Jennifer, thank you so much. It's a good moment to go reread The Handmaid's Tale. We wish you a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. You too, Ashley.
I mean, Michael, has Canada ever looked better? The worst thing that happened to the United States turns out to be the best thing that's happened to our northern neighbor.
Yeah, although I wouldn't choose Toronto first. I'd go to Montreal. But, you get a little bit more of the French vibe in there. It's a little bit of but hey, we're all looking north these days.
Montreal's too cold for me, I think. Toronto, for some reason, feels slightly more temperate.
Okay. Toronto's the Miami of Canada? I don't know what.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 3-hour flight from New York. Not even, actually. It's shorter than that. And you can fly into that great city airport. I'm a Toronto fan.
Okay. Well, I'll see you in Montreal.
On a more sinister note, we have a very fascinating and also very sad story of the killing of Brianna Kupfer in Los Angeles. Barbara Schroeder, a screenwriter and director, joins us to tell us all about it. Welcome, Barbara.
Hi, good to be here.
So, Barbara, take us back to January 13th, 2022. What was happening in the lives of the Kupfer sisters?
Yeah, this was a very tight-knit family. There were 2 sisters, 2 brothers, a mom and a dad. They lived in this Tony enclave of Pacific Palisades. Really good, solid family. Brianna was the eldest, and she was described as being kind of the glue that held the other siblings together because, 4 kids, that's a lot of dynamics that you're dealing with there. She was, as we like to say, adulting. Brianna was adulting, where she had graduated college, she was going to grad school at UCLA, and she went to work that day at a furniture store on La Brea Avenue in Los Angeles called the Croft House Furniture Store. And she was very happy to have this job, had been working there about a year. Went there anticipating that she might be working with a coworker, but that coworker had an appointment, a doctor's appointment. She was pregnant and had a maternity appointment. So Brianna was alone by herself in the store that day, expecting just a regular day with customers coming in and buying furniture. And, it turned into the worst day for the Kupfer family.
So what do we know about what happened next?
Brianna was working by herself, and this was around 11-ish, and somebody walked into the store, only customer, she's the only person in the store, and it's a very big store, so imagine a big, huge, not warehouse, but lots of furniture. And this person has a backpack on, and it's in 2022, so it's still like, the tail of COVID. He has a mask on, a face mask, a backpack, and a hoodie. Brianna had been raised to be non-judgmental, so in her world, as her mom told me later, Brianna probably thought this could be some, music artist or whoever, who knows who it could be. So she's very friendly. And this person named Sean Laval Smith in his early 30s walks in and says that he's looking for furniture because his girlfriend's moving in. So Brianna starts exchanging information with him saying, hey, why don't you look over here? What color are you looking for? In pretty short order, things become a little weird because he starts asking her some odd questions like, hey, are you following this Biden stuff? And can I have your Facebook information? So Brianna gets a bad vibe and she texts. She pulls her phone out and kind of surreptitiously texts her boss, or her manager actually, to say, hey, something odd's going on. Could you please, come check this out? The manager doesn't see the text right away. But when she does see the text, she calls the owner of the store, who immediately leaves and says, I'm going over there. I'm going to see what's going wrong. And he turns on the in-store cameras and he can actually see what happened in the next 10 minutes, which was the death of Brianna Kupfer. And the reason that we know what was being said was, and this was something I didn't find out until I interviewed the family and sat in at the trial. The reason we know what was being said is because this Sean Laval Smith pulled out a little audio tape recorder, set it on the countertop, and recorded the murder of Brianna Kupfer.
What do we know about Sean Laval Smith and what the motive might have been here?
Yeah, and depending on if you listen to the prosecution or the defense, there were different motives. The prosecution was telling the court and telling the jury that this was premeditated, first degree, special circumstances. He was lying in wait. He knew what he was going to do. They said he was searching for a lone female to kill. And there was some precedent for that because he had walked into other stores before walking into the Croft House. And apparently every time he saw that more than one person was in the store, he walked out. So that may be valid. And then the defense said that the Sean Laval Smith, who, by the way, had an extensive criminal record on both coasts, East Coast and West Coast, over 15 arrests for various infractions, and also had a history of mental illness. So this is somebody who was bouncing around the system and, homeless at times and in shelters at times. And the defense said, look, he's not a master criminal. He just walked in there. And at the point when he was asking Brianna for her Facebook information and she wouldn't give it to him, he was insulted and he pulled out a knife and stabbed her 46 times, that it was an impromptu act. The plea was Sean Laval Smith pled not guilty by reason of insanity, and they were arguing for some kind of leniency, a possible parole at some point. So that was the trial as it was set up.
I mean, this seems like a fairly open and shut case, but as you were covering the trial last fall, what did you discover?
It was interesting because this story, it actually got on my radar back in 2022 when it happened, just as a concerned mom. I thought, oh my God, in fact, my youngest son ran in the same social circles as Brianna's younger sister. So I was aware of it and, heartbroken as anybody would be. But it wasn't until, a couple of years later when I read that the family was going to go to trial. And I thought, wait, they have to go to trial? You're right. It seemed like an open and shut case, especially since they had the murder on tape. And I just couldn't stop thinking about what it must be like for this family to have to go into a courtroom for, days at a time, possibly weeks, and sit in the same room with the person that killed their daughter. And to have to endure that, it felt like a journey that would be interesting to see and to find out what happened. And I thought because it seemed like it should be an open and shut case, I thought it would be interesting to see the trial unfold. And that's where I met Brianna's younger sister, Michaela. Actually, I interviewed the family before, and then I talked with Michaela in court. And I realized, this is an interesting angle here to see how a younger sister handles going to court. Because at first, Michaela was not going to go to court. She said, I'm not going to sit in that room with that guy. And then when she found out that there was going to be an opportunity for victims' impact statements, and she thought that there was a chance, she heard that there was a chance that the defense was trying to get him, have him get some, to get out at some point. She said, oh no, I'm going to go to court and I'm going to be there for my sister. So that's something interesting to read when you read the article, how Michaela's journey and what she said in her victim's impact statement, very, very moving and profound and wise.
So what happened to Sean?
It was interesting because it was a two-phase trial. There was the guilt phase and then there was the insanity phase. So the judge had to determine whether or not he was insane at the time of the killing. Because if he had been judged insane, then there would have been a shot for him to go into mental health treatment and actually be released at some point. But the judge, after she listened to doctors from both sides, both prosecution and defense. And interestingly, both doctors, and I haven't seen this in my career very often, where doctors on opposing sides actually agree, but both doctors agreed that he was legally sane at the time that he killed Brianna. He had mental health issues, but they didn't rise to the level of insanity. And the judge ended up in the second phase of the trial ruling first degree guilt. So he's in prison for the rest of his life.
And Barbara, this case kind of really shocked Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Has it resonated since then? I mean, has there been any deeper sort of change in the laws or, change in the community?
Yeah, it would be great if it would help with change in the laws, because I think what I learned from following this case and deep diving into the research and trying to find information on how many homeless people have mental health problems, end up becoming murderers, those kinds of statistics are not being kept regularly. But there is a kind of a subtle call to action in the article and from the people who attended this trial, including one of the doctors who treated Sean Smith. He had a great line. He said, what's happening now, especially in Los Angeles, but everywhere where there are homeless people and people with mental health problems. He said, letting people wander the streets is abusive. Shuffling them between prisons, emergency rooms, and psych wards isn't working. They're not getting better. Something needs to change. I do see that people remember this case when they ask what I'm working on and I'm talking about it. They're like, oh yeah, that was so horrible, whatever happened. And it is being used in some arenas as an example of the work that needs to be done to curb the people like the Sean Laval Smith, like to really help those people, to get them out of situations. Because this is a guy who was in and out of prison, in and out of mental health institutions. He actually took himself to homeless shelters and took himself to drug rehab centers, tried to get better, but wasn't getting better and wasn't getting help. There is a call to action in the piece, and people are using this sad, sad case as an example of what needs to be done and what could be done to help avoid these sorts of things from happening again, because I'm hopefully not going to have to cover something as heinous as this again. But, there is room for improvement.
Well, Barbara, thank you so much for taking us through this incredibly tragic story.
Well, and thank you so much for letting us tell it, because hopefully it'll help someone else someday too. Thank you.
Okay, Michael, I think the only person who's able to get us out of this might be Taylor Swift.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to Kevin about this because it sounds like maybe we all can become billionaires if we follow the business practices of Taylor Swift.
Okay, Kevin Evers is a senior editor at the Harvard Business Review, and he is here to unpack the mythology and the money-making of Taylor Swift. Welcome, Kevin.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Kevin, before Taylor Swift was the most discussed musician in the world, she was just a young country singer trying to find her voice and develop an audience. Take us back to those days of Taylor Swift in country music land.
Taylor was about 13 or 14 years old when she was trying to break out into country music, and she had a very clear vision for what she wanted to do. She wanted to write her own songs, and she wanted to write those songs for an audience of her peers, teenage girls. But that was a market that many people in country music did not think existed, teenage girls. And they had a right to think that.
I mean, why was that? I mean, because obviously pop music has been relying on teenage girls for decades now, and that has been such an important market for them, starting with Britney Spears and even long before that.
The country audience at the time, and this is still pretty much the case, tended to lean a bit older and conservative, and 80% of the hits on country music back in 2006 were performed by men, and men were played 3 to 4 times more than women on country radio. And the executives in country music had the data, so they saw that data that I just mentioned, but they also had failed experiences. They tried to break through teenage artists before, and it didn't quite work, or those artists didn't find the longevity that they would have hoped.
So why was Taylor successful with this audience?
Her music was very tailored to that audience. The other teen artists who tried to break through were performing songs that were written by older songwriters, and that music wasn't tailored to the teen audience. Taylor was singing songs for teenage girls from her perspective. Her songs were about boys and breakups. They're about things that her peers could relate to.
One of the things as you sort of also distilled in the book is she and her manager, as you say, they ripped a page from the playbook of any good entrepreneur, right? Everyone else was saying, there's not a lane over here. And they said, we think there is a lane and we're going to go for it, right?
Classic entrepreneurial story, right? Seizing an opportunity that other people had ignored. And it's also something that Marvel did back in the 1960s. They were in a fierce battle with DC Comics. Marvel was a pretty small publisher of comics at the time, but DC was really catering their content toward younger people. And Marvel decided, hey, there's college students, there's younger adults who like comics. And so they decided to tailor their comics toward that audience and to make more human and relatable superheroes. And that ended up being a great move by them because they too seized that opportunity that other comic book publishers were ignoring.
And from a business perspective as well, you sort of note that like Taylor and her team, they knew they were underdogs and they also capitalized on that moment and sort of really leaned into that heavy, right? From a business perspective.
For sure. They were definitely underdogs. And the challenge of being an underdog is you need to convince other people that you have a viable product. And you have to come up with very creative ways to do that. But once you do, you end up being a category of one. And that's exactly what happened with Taylor Swift. Once she broke out in country radio, once she convinced those gatekeepers that her music was worth listening to and that there was an audience for her music, she was operating in an environment where there really weren't other people, other artists like Taylor Swift. So once she broke through, she had an extreme advantage because she was a category of one.
I mean, so Kevin, between, 2006 and 2009 or so, or 2010, I suppose, she went to the top of the charts. She became this sort of stratospheric success story in country music. But why did she decide to transition over into pop? And what did that mean for her business and demographic?
That was such a bold move on her part because she had cornered both markets. She was the most played musician artist on country radio, and she was dominating the pop charts. So you'd think you would keep doing the same thing, right? You can have your cake and eat it too. It's much better to corner two markets than to try to corner one. But Taylor has always had this unease with her success. And I think she felt that her music may be sounding the same. And she was a young adult at that point. She was approaching 25 years old. Her musical tastes were really changing. And as she said, she didn't want to chase two rabbits anymore. She thought that was inauthentic. She didn't want to chase country music, and she didn't want to chase pop. So she went full on pop. And that ended up being a good decision as well. She expanded her audience. She expanded her global appeal, but that would not have happened if she hadn't taken such a big risk of leaving country music completely behind.
And do the country fans continue to embrace her? Or, how is she regarded in country music circles now?
I think a lot of her fans followed her over to pop. And I think the reason why she was able to make such a big decision like that is because she had developed such close relationships with those fans. And she took a bet that those fans were more into her than the genre of country music. And that turned out to be true.
You're an editor of the Harvard Business Review. Harvard Business School, famously known for what we call the case studies, right? Looking at a company or sort of like asking students, what can you learn? What's best practices? How do you sort of strategize against them? So if you're looking at Taylor as a case study, what are the takeaways that any business or creative person should take from her if you were going to teach that class?
There's so many, but the number one thing I keep going back to is Taylor's fan obsession. She understands that she's operating in a culture market, and talent really matters in a culture market. But at the same time, superstars aren't self-made. They're created by their fans. And so Taylor goes above and beyond to delight her fans and surprise her fans in new ways. Jeff Bezos would call this customer obsession. In Taylor's case, it's called fan obsession. She really tries to engineer social influence as much as she can. She does this on her social media strategies, the way she drops hints and clues. And we saw this at the Eras Tour, too. She could have played 2 hours, her greatest hit show, and her fans would have loved it. But instead, she plays 3.5 hours. Her set list spans over 40 songs. And she finds ways to exceed her fans' high expectations. And that's a big reason why her fans stick around for so long and why she's able to grow her fan base over time.
So, Kevin, how many Eras Tours performances did you attend?
I saw 2 with my daughter. The first time we went to Foxborough, she was 6 years old. And we went recently, a few months back, to Toronto, and she was 8 years old when we went.
And which was better?
Oh, Foxborough, for sure. It was the first time. It was a May day in New England. As we all know, New England has horrible weather during the winter. And it was a beautiful day. It was in the 80s. And it was my daughter's first big concert. She's obsessed with Taylor Swift. And being a witness to her joy, which was a mix of how she looks on Christmas morning and how she looked when she held her baby brother for the first time, was an ultimate dad moment.
I mean, Kevin, you've got to be the coolest dad at the school pickup. I mean, you truly have written the book now on Taylor Swift. Like, are the 8-year-olds clamoring for your autograph? Are you being brought in to speak in class?
I'm getting major dad points, I will say. And my daughter was featured in a USA Today article on the book. So she thinks she's famous. So she's really excited about that. And yeah, one of her friends saw the book and said her mind was blown. I definitely have a lot of 8-year-old fans.
Well, I think you and Taylor need to get together to talk about this book. Like, I see a master class. I see some television appearances. Like, I'm confident in you, Kevin. You can make this happen.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And if so, Michael and I expect an invitation. We will be there dressed in full, I don't know, Michael, Reputation era? What are we going to wear?
Whatever you guys want me to. I do what I'm told.
I could see Michael in the Reputation era. I could see that too.
I could see that too.
I could see that.
I'm getting out my red bodysuit, Kevin. Let's do it.
Okay.
Kevin, thank you so much, not only for this great book, which is so fascinating on so many levels, but for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
There's only one place to discover a global snapshot of the current cultural scene. Airmail's Arts Intel Report. Our international research tool for what to do and where and when to do it is user-friendly, continuously updated, and meticulously curated. Arts Intel is handy at home, on the road, and when you're planning your next trip. It also includes indispensable lists of restaurants and hotels in key cities around the world, recommended by our well-traveled experts. Explore Arts Intel at airmail.news/arts-intel, and be sure to sign up for our Week in Culture newsletter, which is published every Wednesday afternoon at airmail.news/WIC. I'm Chris Garrett, Airmail Deputy Editor, and I never leave home without it. Bon voyage.
It's so funny, Michael. As we were talking to Kevin, I was thinking about when I was a junior fashion reporter. This is a very long time ago, but Taylor was a teenage country music star and she was the face of a denim brand or something like that at the time. And I remember meeting her at a press day in Midtown Manhattan, and she really made an impression back then. I mean, even though I knew nothing about country music, but she just had that presence and drive and ambition that is quite rare. And when you see it, there's no mistaking it. Anyway, now like the rest of the world, I'm a huge Swiftie. Can't help it.
This is how one becomes a Swiftie.
What's your favorite Taylor song?
I'm going to confess something. I've tried to listen to her, and I've never really gotten into her. Therefore, I can't really even tell you a favorite song.
I don't know why I was expecting something else. You're not a Lavender Haze guy? You're not a Lover guy? I mean, this shocks me.
Lavender Haze, isn't that like some bedtime tea that people drink?
Made by Celestial Seasonings, maybe. Well, on that note, Michael, I know your weekend homework is going to be listening to all things Taylor Swift, but I'm sure you've got something you can recommend to us.
I do. And, last week I recommended Hacks, but, which I was getting into. I'm two episodes in. I don't know if you are. We can talk about it. But now I've checked out, have you had time to look at The Last of Us, which is returned?
The Last of Us. Is this the Florence Pugh, Andrew Garfield's film?
No, this is the one with Pedro Pascal, the big, thingy.
Oh, right. What was the name of that Florence Pugh movie? Hold on. Oh, I'm sorry. That was called We Live in Time. I saw that. Sorry. They do sound kind of similar, you have to admit.
Yeah, I guess. But this is, Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey. And, you've got new people showing up this season. But it's the big post-apocalyptic drama. If you don't think you're living in post-apocalyptic times, this will certainly generate enough anxiety in you. But it's also great drama. It's based on that video game franchise. And it's back for season 2. I'm only one episode in because that's how Max, where you can stream it, doles it out. But the action's better than ever, and the suspense is better than ever. Fascinated to see where it goes. So it's The Last of Us. I'm sure many of you have already watched it, but if not, get started. It's on Max. And you, my dear?
So, Michael, I'm sorry to tell you that I went to the movie theater last night and I saw Drop, which is a new thriller directed by Christopher Landon. And it stars Megan Fahey as a young mother who is going on a first date after the death of her husband, and her young son is home with a babysitter. And as she is at this beautiful restaurant in a high-rise building in downtown Chicago with this handsome man sitting across from her, all hell breaks loose and her son is taken hostage at home with his babysitter. And this is the premise of the movie, and it all unfolds over the course of this dinner where she's trying to figure out what's going on, why everybody wants her kid dead, and what her role to play is going to be. We read so much about the state of the American film industry and how movie theaters are in decline. And I empathize, but I can't help but think, can't we make better movies than this? I mean, Megan Fahey keeps this thing alive. She's such a fun actress. I loved her in The White Lotus. But, these movies are so terrible. We know so many great screenwriters out there working, and I wonder why better movies aren't getting made. And we're getting this kind of, I don't want to call it nonsense, but that's sort of what it is. The writing was so weak. There were some fun performances and, it was definitely a popcorn movie. So I suppose I have only myself to blame. But anyway, you can skip Drop in the theater if that's what you were wondering.
So it's your choice between the theater's Drop or Minecraft. So that kind of sums up the state of the film business right now.
And my children saw Minecraft yesterday when I was watching Drop, and they thought it was terrible. There's just nothing. It's everything is this gross horror flick. It's just really demoralizing, honestly.
Not here on Morning Meeting. We've got you.
We only have the good stuff. I'm sorry, my children are still on spring break, so I have really not engaged with that much culture this week. I'm sorry that I have nothing else to recommend, but I will be back in fine form again next week. We thank you all so much for joining us. Michael, will you please read us out?
Morning Meeting is produced by Airplay Productions and edited by Jesse Cannon. Our co-editors are Graydon Carter and Alexander Stanley. Our chief operating officer is Bill Keenan. And our deputy editors are Ashley Baker, Chris Garrett, Nathan King, Julie Vitale, and Ash Carter. Our CMO is Emily Davis, and our music supervisor is Randall Poster. Our theme music is The Cute Monster by the Buddy Collette Quintet. A new edition of Airmail is published every Saturday, so please subscribe and enjoy all of our stories on airmail.news, which we update every day. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Airmail Weekly. We will be back here next Saturday with another edition of Morning Meeting. But in the meantime, be sure to subscribe at Spotify or Apple Music. But most of all, thank you again for joining us.